continuing on in section 1.7, we're here at the top of page 2, and I'm going to talk just take a brief little detour before we do some division examples. Talk about multiplicative inverse. That's a mouthful. Don't want to have to say that 3 times fast. It's also known as the reciprocal. It's where the number is upside down or flipped. The technical definition, the one that you'll see too on page 72 in the book, we reference it here in the middle of the page. It's what something can be multiplied by to get it back to equaling 1. Okay. So the multiplicative inverse of a number times that number itself is going to always equal 1. So if you have a number and then you have its multiplicative inverse, called the MINV there, okay, which would be 1 over the number. Okay, you multiply those out, those two numbers top and bottom are going to cancel. You're going to always get yourself back to 1. So we're just going to do a few examples where you practice finding the multiplicative inverse of each number. So we'll start with number 40, and there's no rules for positive or negative. Every number has a multiplicative inverse. So negative 12, start by putting it in fraction form and then flip it. So negative 12 is the same as negative 12 over 1. Then the multiplicative inverse is equal to that flip of that. Okay, which would be 1 over negative 12, or you can just imagine this negative 1 just kind of hanging out front here. Do the flip, it's negative 1 times 1 over 12, so you just get negative 1 over 12. Nothing changes with the sign of it. It's either going to be positive or negative, just like it was when it started. Another way you could think of it is, sure, flip that to the bottom and it's 1 over negative 12. Which is still the same as negative 1 over 12, or putting the negative up on the top, the numerator, negative 1 over 12. Those are all equal. 1 over negative 12 is the same as negative out front, it's the same as negative on the top. And so just a little sidebar there. Let's keep going with a couple multiplicative inverses here. I've got negative 4/9, the multiplicative inverse. It's already in fraction form, so I flip it. And I end up with negative 9/4. Sign stays the same, you just need to flip it. Okay, you try this one, number 38. Pause the video, give it a whirl, we'll come back. So the answer for this one is 7 over 1, which then we just normally write that as plain old 7. Okay, just like 40 started at negative 12. And became negative 1/12, so we take 1 over something, flip that, dividing by 1 is extra ink, extra paper, extra chiseling back in the days when there wasn't paper and we were doing math with rocks and carving it into stone. I'm pretty sure that's where a lot of shortcuts were discovered, when we had to work really hard to get the math even down in a written form. I don't know for sure, I just like to think that's the way it happened. Let's see what kind of problems are next. The instructions say to rewrite the division as multiplication and then find the quotient. You do not have to do it this way, but when you're out in the wild of mathematics, you can do division however you want to. But again, we're preparing ourselves for the algebra, and we want to start thinking about division as multiplying the inverse. Okay, so division is equal to multiplying by the inverse. Okay, which is something that we were taught dealing with fractions, but it actually is what division is from the get-go. Division is multiplying by the inverse. When we are dividing by 2, we are really multiplying by a half. We're cutting things in half. And there's lots of examples we could go through. And this is another way to see the relationship between division and multiplication here. So we start off with negative 18 divided by 6, and we say, okay, we're going to change that to multiplication. So it's going to become negative 18 times the inverse. Okay, so 6, the multiplicative inverse for that becomes 1 over 6. So my problem is now negative 18 times 1/6. And in terms of fractions, that means I have negative 18 over 1 times 1 over 6. 18 is the same as 3 times 6, still negative there, over 1 times 1 over 6. And the 6's are going to cancel. Okay, this is what's happening in division. We're dividing out, we're factoring out what factors these two items have in common. So we're seeing if there's any 6's as a factor, and that's what makes it go in evenly. When it doesn't go in evenly, it means that that factor is not present, and it only go in so many times with a leftover, a remainder. And that's how we get decimals and all that. So negative 3 times 1 on the top is just negative 3, the whole thing over 1, or just plain negative 3. Again, another way to think of it, you probably had the answer before I even said look at number 44. Negative 18 divided by 6. 18 divided by 6 is 3. Negative divided by positive, different signs. The answer is negative. So we're still applying that. Different signs, answer is negative. I didn't really stress that. I was mostly looking at the multiplicative inverse there. Okay. Let's look at 46 as well. We've got negative 30 over negative 5. We want to really train ourselves that the fraction bar is the same as division. That's the same as negative 30 divided by negative 5. Which means that we've got a negative, I'll write it over here this time, negative times a negative, so we know our answer is going to be positive. Okay? And over here we had a negative divided by, sorry I said times, we're not. We have a negative divided by a positive, so we know our answer is going to be negative. Okay. And this is why the rules are the same for multiplying and dividing, because to move from division to multiplication, you just use the inverse. No signs ever change. So we need to have the same rule for both multiplying and dividing, because that's the only way it'll keep things making sense. It has to match up with what numbers naturally do. So when we're dividing here, this becomes multiplication, and negative 5 is negative 5 over 1, and the multiplicative inverse becomes negative 1/5. So I've got negative 30 over 1 times negative 1 over 5. I've got negative times negative. I already predicted my answer is going to be a positive, so I don't have to worry about that right now. I can just focus on what's happening with the multiplication. 30 is 5 times 6 over 1. We still have the 1/5 here. I'm just doing some pre-canceling so I don't have to work that hard at reducing, and also it's getting my mind ready for the algebra process where we can't keep combining all the way to an answer and reduce nicely and succinctly. We're going to need to pre-cancel, find those factors ahead of time and divide them out. And so our final version here, we've got negative times negative on the top. Negative 6 times a negative 1, that becomes a positive 6, the whole thing over 1, or just 6. Again, you'll be able to do a lot of this in your head. Just make sure you show enough steps so you really understand what's going on, because as we move forward and involve algebra, you're going to want these same steps, and you're going to want to be comfortable and confident in them. Page 72, I think you can see this table for the most part. Division is the same as multiplying by that second number's inverse. And here they show it in the algebraic definition using letters to mean any number for A and any number for B. In this case, B can't be 0 though. We don't get to divide by 0. 0 never gets to be in the denominator. Or they have the definition in words as well. So the book does a nice job of giving you different ways of thinking about things also. I'll see you at the bottom of the page for a couple more examples.